and welcome to today's session. As always, let's observe 30 seconds silence to devote the divine mother for our program. Thank you. We're pleased to have with us Sri Sachidanand Mohanty talk to us about the problem of self-determination, childrenhood and problem of self-determination. A small introduction about Sri Sachidanand Mohanty is a former professor and head of University of India. Winner of many national and international awards, such as the Ghana, British Council, Fulbright, Charles Wallace, and the Salzburg. In the field of British American gender translation and post-colonial studies. His work has appeared in Oxford, Sage, Routledge, and Orient Longman, among other American publishing houses. He was the former Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Odisha. I hereby invite Sri Sachidanand Mohanty to take the floor.
Distinguished members of this audience, we're very fortunate to be in the midst of such a beautiful hall, which is presided by the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. Aesthetic, elegant, futuristic, and classical at the same time, surrounded by trees and the sylvan surroundings, and also the lake close by. What could be more wonderful than to have this deliberation, and may I say satsang, on this Sunday morning? I'm extremely grateful to my late parents for teaching me the value of idealism in life, especially my mother, late Bidut Prabha Devi, who is a household name and a renowned poet, Sahitya Academy Award winner of the state of Orissa. I'm equally grateful to the mother and Sri Aurobindo for this life transforming experience that I went through at the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education way back in 1966, when their mother personally selected some of us, and I was one of them. I think it's completely changed me and gave me a kind of a perspective which is both national and international at the same time. Today, Sri Aurobindo is known as a philosopher, and he said he wrote philosophy by accident because he said he was first and foremost a poet, a mystic, a patriot, and a nationalist. And everybody knows that he was an exponent of the theory of evolution. I'm very grateful to the management of Sri Aurobindo Bhavan, functioning under the auspices of Sri Aurobindo Society. I'm grateful to Yogeshji, who I imagine is listening to me through Zoom, and thankful to Yaminiji, and all other friends, Sukanto and Mr. Bhattacharya, septuagenarian, but so active, so youthful, and so energetic. Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Thank you, Yogeshji, for your kind invitation and for the hospitality which is being extended to me and by my companion, my wife, Srimati Simi here, who is sitting here. Now, the topic that I have chosen for myself is Shorbindo and the problems of their self-determination. And I'm very happy to address this topic because in our midst today is present Sri Madan Gopalji, who retired as Additional Chief Secretary of the State of Karnataka, Senior IAS officer. And his book just has been released. It is a book which combines social activism, left wing activism, semi autobiographical with spirituality. And it begins with left wing extremism of the late 60s and 70s, but it ends with the Maharshi, the Ashram of Raman Maharshi, just been released. So I think there are several things which are connected, which come together, remarkable convergences. As E.M. Forster said memorably, if only only connect. So E.M. Forster said connect the dots. How do you connect the dots? Very important. And this is a lecture, a talk that I'm giving for the first time. It is completely new, fresh from the oven, as it were. Why is self-determination important? I have divided, for the sake of convenience, into three parts. We talk into three parts. In the first part, I shall very briefly, in 5 minutes' time, highlight and underline the importance of self-determination as an ideal, which is the ideal before the nation, before the world. In fact, right now, the war which is going on in a catastrophic manner between Russia and expansionism of Russia and NATO and Ukraine, for example, is nothing but a search for self-determination. At home, if the nuclear family has emerged, the joint family has broken down. There are some people who talk about the narrative, the rhetoric of decline, that we are all the time declining. But may I differ from this point of view? Because Socrates, the great teacher of Athens, was poisoned to death. Because Socrates also was battling against individual opinion and freedom of thinking and originality of thought. And the similar manner, also things are going on. So, have you made a progress? Have you gone back in life and society? Sri Aurobindo talks about the theory of evolution, which he says is cyclic. It is not progressive in the linear sense, but it is cyclic. But each time the cycle comes back, it is renewed with vigor and with vitality so that we do not revisit the history at the same time. Sometimes we feel that those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Sri Aurobindo says optimistically that history is not revisited at the same time. And indeed, Heraclitus in ancient Greece had said, you cannot cross the same river twice. So what Sri Aurobindo had said in the aftermath of the First World War, 1914, 1918, Sri Aurobindo joined hands with the husband of Mother Mira Alfasa, and he wrote the series of articles which had appeared in the area. He spent 30 years in what he called the cave of his tapasya. And Sri Aurobindo in the post Pondicherry days, Sri Aurobindo in the pre Pondicherry days, it is heaven and earth, completely transformed because of his yoga. And the record of the yoga have been recorded and in the form of books. And it's not intelligible to us, but she was really undergoing intense sadhana, intense yoga. And out of this intense yoga, he wrote series of articles right from overhead, and whether it is poetry, like future poetry, whether it is Savitri, which he wrote, and he wrote completely right till the end of his life, whether it's a revision of Life Divine, which he did in 1949, whether it's a revision of the ideal of humanity, which he composed during the First World War, and then 49, and he says, I mean, he was constantly writing. The genesis of Savitri was there in Baroda days, Love and Death, for example. And in 1949, he said, I don't have time. He was in a rush. He had to complete his magnum opus, Savitri. And he said, if I were to write, if I have to revise the ideal human unity, and there are three books that he wrote, Human Cycle, which was initially called The Psychology of Social Development. Then there was a Ideal of Humanity and a much neglected book called The War on Self-Determination. You have in your hand, I do hope at the end of the talk, you'll go back and look at the flyers, because I wanted Sri Aurobindo to go to the mainstream academia. I wanted Sri Aurobindo to go to the mainstream media, for example. I didn't want Sri Aurobindo to be confined to a group of devotees and disciples because Sri Aurobindo is not meant for a smaller group. He has a universal appeal. His international in approach, his multiculturalism approach, and his views on ethnicity is very important, far ahead of his own time. So I have been in my own career, I've been trying to project and disseminate. Who am I to project? He is very much there himself. If only we have a role, small, marginal, and humble role to disseminate some of his writing, because we have been so lucky to read him. And I think it is important to read Sri Aurobindo. As the mother said, even if you don't understand, Sri Aurobindo's words have magic power. And I am really talking to a learned audience that is already so well disposed to Aurobindo. Why is self determination important? At home, the child wants self determination, freed from the clutches of the parents. The newly wedded daughter in law, Bahu in the family, wants self determination, no longer willing to really carry out the dictates of the mother in law. The child, the son, wants to really carve out a path for himself. And that is also a question of self determination. There's a fight between the state that we live in, Karnataka and Karnataka and Maharashtra, over Belgaum, for example. There are fights between Andhra Pradesh and Orissa about the sharing of the Rishikelia rivers, for example. Fight between Orissa and Bengal, for example. And fight between Kashmir and the rest of India, for example. It was Ainsley Embry, the famous historian. He said the 20th century is witnessing the conflict between groups and individuals everywhere. So I think, may I suggest that as a may I suggest that as Marx and Engels had said that philosophers have written so many terms of volumes about the nature of the world, but what is important, Marx and Engels had said, to change it. And Vivekananda said memorably that human nature is like dog's tail. You cannot change it. The moment you straighten it, it comes back. But Sri Aurobindo said human nature can be changed through a process of yoga. Yoga is nothing, a union between the individual and the divine. So what is important is not to theorize so much. It's interesting as a kind of intellectual and mental titillation, excitement, vital excitement, as he says. But what is important is that this goal, this trajectory that we have really discovered for ourselves, is it going to make a difference to our own life? And that is the bottom line. So if it doesn't really help us contribute in any insignificant manner and minimal, negligible manner in changing our own life, then I'm sure that it's really not effective enough. So Sri Aurobindo says this self-determination in the family, in the individual, and says, Papa kehta hai bada naam karega. And what is that naam? Join the IIT, join mathematics, forget about the Sudharma, forget about the Swabhava. In the same breath, we are celebrating Gita, for example. We put the Gita in a slot. There is a question of a boardroom and a puja room. Boardroom is hard facts of life, management, money making. Puja room is devotion. And of course, now and then take a plunge during Kumbh Mela to cleanse ourselves all the sins that we have accumulated in our unbridled desire over the pursuit of money. So that is what is going on not only here, but Sri Aurobindo talks about hedonism, the unbridled pursuit of money and material comforts, that is hedonism. There is nothing wrong about the physical pleasures also and comfort. But Sri Aurobindo makes a fundamental distinction between asceticism and austerity. And he says austerity is good, self discipline is good, not hatha yoga. But asceticism, self denial, and mortification of the flesh and denial of the bodily self is incorrect. I must be acutely conscious of the use of time because there is so much to cover, but everything has to be brought back into the domain of self determination. The two chapters I must really signal your attention to: the materialist denial and the ascetics refusal in life divine. And Sri Aurobindo is talking about integration. My friends, Sri Aurobindo said all problems of existence are essentially problems of harmony. If there is one magic key that we have in mind, that magic key is the question of integration. How do you integrate? How do you integrate the individual within the family itself? How do you integrate the family with the kinship? And how do you integrate the kinship with the community? How do you integrate the community with the province and province with the rest of the world? Sri Aurobindo and the mother say that each time we outgrow to a higher level, you don't necessarily deny and negate the other things. Family remains, kinship remains, community remains, province remains, the nation remains, and the state remains. So there are four areas in which self-determination is really operating today. One is the question of language and ethnicity. The second is citizenship rights and sovereignty, for example. And there are other goals also where self-determination with regard to minority rights and multiculturalism. That's where self-determination is really. You would notice that this vocabulary, this idiom that I'm using, is generally not used in the context of the discourse of Sri Aurobindo. And I'm using this term adversitely because Sri Aurobindo was far ahead of his time. Apart from the question of the transformation of his own, the need for the transformation of our own self and the need for inner growth. He was deeply concerned about the change of society and culture and polity. Way back in the beginning of the 19th, 20th century, he wrote a series of articles called National Education. And education is something which has really pursued him throughout his life. And that was completed by the mother in 1968 in the form of the Auroville experiment itself. Sri Aurobindo's unique contribution to education is not realized. And the three principles that he enjoined before us are extremely relevant to the discussion of self-determination. The first principle of all true teaching, he said, is that nothing can be taught. In one stroke itself, he really annulled the arrogance of the teacher that he or she has the gospel truth. And then Macaulay's manner, for example, we have to do the rote learning. Unfortunately, we're trying to dismantle that in the new education policy. The second principle, he said, is that the mind has to be consulted in the process of growth. The child is not a mold of clay, is not a puppet. He is not going to fulfill the incompleted desires of the parents that the child should be an engineer or a doctor or an IAS officer. Nothing wrong about them. They are equally important professions. But those decisions, like in the form of Swadharma and Swabhava, have to be decided by the child himself. So the role of a teacher is that of a pathfinder. He is a guide. And finally, he said, education proceeds from near to far. We must know about Alsur Lake. We must know about Karnataka. We must know about the neighboring states. Then you will know about President Clinton and Chelsea, the daughter. So that is the kind of the system of progression that he is talking about. So I don't need to really, I mean, there will be lectures so together about the need for decolonizing our own mind. And Sri Aurobindo in the Foundations of Indian Culture rebutted the claims of William Archer. And he followed John Woodruff, the Tantric scholar who wrote, Is India Civilized? That is the question. And now with new imperialism and cultural imperialism, I don't need to tell you that we need to really decolonize our mind. This is the kind of a point of departure. This is the context in which we are having a deliberation today. Now, I'll move quickly to the second part because I must really devote enough time for question answers because otherwise it will be reduced to a monologue. And following the spirit of Sri Aurobindo, that he believed in dialogue, we must indeed have a dialogue here itself. The second, the first major event which took place in the question of the interrogation about self-determination is at the end of the First World War. President Woodrow Wilson was the president. And then the League of Nations, after the Treaty of Versailles was created, was signed. And you know that Germany was humiliated in this treaty and had to make war reparation. And Hitler, when he comes to power in 1930s, uses it very cunningly, deftly, and convincing the German people that there is an enemy there. And he identifies the enemies in an anti-Semitic manner, the Jews. And he says that we must have a place under the sun. The need for Germany to have self-determination. But Sri Aurobindo talks about true and false subjectivism. And he says that is a false subjectivism. German national ego, and the form of Nazism and Italy fascism, for example, it arises. And then, of course, when Paul Richard and the mother were in Japan, and there was a pan-Asian movement, and Sri Aurobindo, one of the five dreams of Sri Aurobindo was the rise of Asia. The rise of Asia has not taken place. And Paul Richard was in Japan. And first time Tagore goes to Japan, he is welcomed with open arms. But the second time he goes, not a single person comes to receive him at the port. Why? Because he was against war. He was against fascism. He was against the rising national. And he dies in 1941. By 1941, the Second World War has taken place. And the alliance, Western democracies one side, and Nazi and fascist and Japan on the other side itself. That we must have our own decide, our own destiny, for example. We must have our own destiny at the expense of some people who are slaves, Slavs, inferior people, Indians included, for example. The Nazi concentration camps, you all know about this. What happened in Auschwitz and Buchenwald and Dachau, for example. That is a monstrosity which was created. And Paul Richard made an appeal on behalf of the Japanese, avant-garde, enlightened section of the people. They said that this Woodrow Wilson's doctrine should reflect the needs of the colored people, the colonized nations. Indonesia under the Dutch, Vietnam under the French, and China was also partly occupied by just Japanese. That should be really liberated, and they should be given the freedom. Guess what? Absolutely fell on the deep ears. Woodrow Wilson. And today people know about the colonial kind of bias, the racial bias that Woodrow Wilson. Today, the Princeton University has changed the name. Woodrow Wilson Center for International Relations has been changed to Princeton University. So I think the humanity is better in certain fundamental sense. And today, I think the United Nations also recently held the Year of the Indigenous People. In our own country, we are acutely conscious of the needs of the tribal and the indigenous people. And we are in favor of orality, not so much of literacy, because literacy at one time was equated with civilization. And civilization and primitivism is an absolutely false category. And then we have to also know by with the benefit of hindsight how colonial anthropology and ethnography had a kind of a colonial and racial bias. So we are wiser. In each case, for example, we are trying to free ourselves from the racial and colonial undertones that have really affected our own behavior itself. The first is, of course, Woodrow Wilson. I'm just signaling for a want of time, in a nutshell, some significant landmarks which have taken place. And of course, it had a qualified risk, a success. And the fact that it was inadequate resulted in the Second World War. And the Second World War was a total war. Total war meaning the entire civilized civilian population was also affected by war, something which we have seen in Syria and Aleppo, and most recently in Ukraine and Bucha, the massacre in Bucha. The civilian population. Forget about the civilian population. The pet dogs and the horses have been butchered by the invading forces. So, civilian. And for the First World War, I think it should be mandatory reading. The World Two World War should be mandatory reading. Today, it is not mandatory reading. People do not know about what happened during the concentration camps, for example. And we know about the Nuremberg trial, which tried the Nazis, Goring and Goebbels for war crimes. But people do not know because the history of the world has been written from the point of view of the conquerors. And the Allied Air Force, Allied bombing in Dresden and Hamburg and Bern and Berlin during the Second World War has not been recorded. And incendiary bombs with the kind of bombs which were thrown in Vietnam, for example, napalm bombs. In 10 kilometers radius, not a single thing will remain, for example. During the Second World War, this kind of a carpet bombing took place in the German cities. What was their crime? The crime was by the Nazis, but the German people paid the price. What was the crime of the Japanese? That the two bombs which were created in the deserts of Los Alamos in New Mexico, for example, by J. Oppenheimer. And when Oppenheimer's explosion took place, he remembered the lines from the Gita. And he wrote this book, autobiography, with a sense of horror called Brighter Than Thousand Suns. When I was in Harvard University, I happened to access this book. We should read this book to know about the horror of atomic weapons, for example. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese are still paying the price. So the point is that war is being fought for the sake of self-determination. We do not know what is the alternative to war in the come conflict. Court cases, police cases, fights between the states, fight between the nations, for example, fight between global powers, between European Union and the American Organization of American States and the Organization of African Unity, for example. So I think literature, languages, international relations, history, everything goes together. So today, I happen to call myself a cultural historian because unless you have a sense of cultural history, I'm afraid we'll be reinventing the wheel itself. The second experiment which took place, major experiment at the international level with regard to self-determination, paradoxically, ironically, in a very unexpected quarters, that was in the form of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. People do not know that people think that it was Iron Curtain. And Winston Churchill called it at the height of the Cold War, Iron Curtain. The Soviet bloc, the Warsaw Pact countries, and NATO, and the so-called free world. But Lenin's views, although he also created the secret police called Cheka, which later on became an NKVD and a dreaded KGB also. But Lenin also had brought all this union, this Georgia and Ukraine and Azerbaijan and all these republics together. Why so? Because he was acutely conscious of the great diversity which existed. Because Russia is a intermingling of Asia and Europe also. There are Asiatic republics, there are European republics there also. Three of the nations were forcibly taken. Their own right to self-determination was denied. And those are Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. In 1940, Ribbentrop and Molotov Pact, for example, unfortunately took over. And Madanji had been there. And he told me that there's so much of Indian culture there, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So you see how small, bigger nations are growing up. And you must read because, then you will be able to connect. The first chapter of Aurobindo ideal of humanity called the turn towards unity, its necessity and dangers. And he does not say that this is right and that is wrong. Aurobindo is always saying in a qualified manner, turn towards unity, its necessity and danger. Turn towards Indian unity, but Indian unity and side by side to Karnataka unity, Odisha unity, and diversity. This is not doesn't come easy to the human mind rooted to reason. And doesn't Aurobindo talks about office and limitation of reason? He doesn't say supremacy of reason. He doesn't say supremacy of the spirit. He says the need for unity, its necessity and dangers. And two examples he is citing. And I am moving in an eclectic manner from one domain to the other. And he says, gives the example of the Roman Empire. What was the reason for the fall of the Roman Empire? Excessive centralization. What was the reason of the Vikramaditya and the Gupta and the Maurya Empire? Excessive centralization. And what will be the danger of the Indian nation? Excessive centralization. Decentralization. Doesn't Gandhiji say that India lives in the village republics? The community, the agriculture has to be strengthened. So that was the first experiment which Lenin tried. And to a limited success, it was completely annulled by Stalin, who comes to power through collectivization program and through Siberia, sending people to Gulag. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn has written about this. And as citizens of the 21st century, 20th century, we must know about what really happened so that we learn from history about the denial of self-determination. And then, of course, the refusal to have dissidents, original thinking. And Aurobindo, remember what he said when Barin was released from the jail in Andaman, Port Blair, the cellular jail. And he asked Aurobindo, and what is the biggest problem with India? And Aurobindo said, lack of original thinking. The biggest scientific manpower, but how many Nobel laureates? The biggest literary force, how many Nobel laureates? After Tagore, for example, lack of original thinking. And Aurobindo stood for original thinking. And Aurobindo stood for the need for making experiments. And the need for experiments also involves the need to make, to have failures because we say ritualistically failure is the secret of success. But how often we give the freedom to fail, because the moment in India we fail, that person is completely disgraced and humiliated and disgraced. So freedom is very, very important to growth. Freedom to make mistakes, freedom to err, for example. So in the case of Stalin and collectivization, I mean, it completely failed because he's denied completely. The secret police was everywhere, and parents were really encouraged to, spy and report against the children. Children were encouraged. You all know about what happened during the NKVD and the KGB, right up to Khrushchev's days. And Khrushchev, of course, did not change right up to the time of Gorbachev. That is the third experiment that you find. And then in modern times also, we have had many other experiments that you find that are being attempted, for example. And we have the European Union, South Asia Union, South Asia Cooperation. Then you have ASEAN, for example. Some of the prophecies and predictions of Aurobindo have come true, some have not come true. And he was not doing some crystal grazing. He was making a kind of prediction on the basis of political and social analysis right up to 1950 itself. But he did not say that this is going to happen. He said it depends on the configuration of the forces, the social, economic, and political forces, and above all, our own willing. Doesn't your mother say that mankind is change, preparing for a huge change? Would you cooperate? So cooperation for the first time in the evolutionary match is so very, very important. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll come to the final stage. I have begun by setting the agenda and the context. Then I told you about the significant experiments which took place right from Lenin's time and Stalin, and also later on, of course, and the World War II, for example. And in the aftermath of the World War II, new states were created. And most recently, and Gulf War II or Gulf War One, when George Bush Sr. was the president, of course, there was an attempt of the Iraqi strongman dictator Saddam Hussein to occupy Kuwait. Kuwait's right to exist for itself was denied on historical ground. So, if you're going to invoke history to deny the present reality, then I think several of our own communities are going to go. So I don't think that history can be invoked in this manner, particularly for the sake of hegemony and domination. So Iraq, it was responsible for that kind of victimhood, which was created upon heaped upon Kuwait. Now I want to really take you to the crucial thing, and this he happens to be here in this book, and this is your window contemporary reader, and I do hope that you read Human Cycle, The Ideal Community, and Human and War and Self-Determination. This book is a slim book. It has limited chapters, and the first chapter is called After the War. Why is a war necessary? War is sometimes necessary because we have the Lord of Destruction, Shiva, and unless there is destruction, there will not be any new creation. But what is necessary? But what is not essential? But what can be avoided? What can be avoided by mutual understanding? That's what the UN is all about. Today we are talking about how effective or ineffective the UN is. Shurabindo begins by saying that self-determination is very, very important. And imagine he's talking about this before the advent of the radical concept of education. When children will tell you on the face, Mama, you're being judgmental. The whole idea that you're being judgmental, that we should not be judgmental. It has become a kind of a cliche. And of course, in the Western context, people talk about what is called cultural relativism, that you can't judge one culture in terms of a prism by another culture, for example. This has become a truism today. It was not a truism. It was not a truism when Macaulay came and denied the Anglicists ruled and and had victory in the country. The Orientalists lost out. It's a great tragedy of our country that the Oriental languages like Persian, like Sanskrit, like Hindi, like Urdu lost out as medium of instruction. And this was, of course, contrary to what others had also done with regard to Bible translation. Bible translation was translated into Indian languages. But did the Indian languages win? Today, the concept, the definition of Indian languages is called vernacular. And Mechanically, ritualistically, we parrot talk this kind of a term, vernacular. You know what vernacular stands for? Vernacular stands for the language of the slaves. And in Tempest, Prospero says, I taught you language and you learned how to curse, for example. Robinson Crusoe is an emblem of servitude, and Caliban is a symbol of servitude. So there is a colonial reading, there's a racial reading of also. There is a universal kind of a reading of Shakespeare. But then Shakespeare is also not freed as a product of his own age. He adapted the stories from the chronicles of Holinshire. But nevertheless, in his own treatment, for example, Shylock, the Jew, the Jew is typified, the Gujarati is typified, the Sindhi is typified as greedy, the Bengali is typified as the intellectual, the Oriya is typified as a lazy person who sleeps in the afternoon. The point is that these stereotypes, we blame the West for racial stereotypes. I think we have to see you know, how racial we are, how color conscious we are. It seems to be the ultimate desire of an Indian male to get married to a, fair convert educated, a female, for example. And that seems to account for the success of Fair and Lovely Cream, for example. Ultimate desire to be fair. And we really deny and decry the West, for example, of their own quota of racism against the blacks and the movement called the Black Lives Matter. Certainly very important. But we must turn, as Aurobindo said, the searchlight within to see how deeply racial we are, how colonial we are, how exploitative we are towards the natives, towards the tribals, towards the ethnic minorities, for example. Religious minority has to be respected. Ethnic minorities have to be respected because they too have their own sense of self-determination. So you find that he says with regard to child, what was child considered? In 1914, much before the coming of the mother, much before the founding of Aurobindo. And when people asked, I remember when I was growing up, the teachers went in a group to the mother and said, Mother, you're going to abolish the exams. Nobody is going to respect us and fear us. Mother said, I want to remove the element of fear from education. And mother said famously, I'm not here to produce brilliant students. I'm here to produce living souls. Does it mean that living souls will not be brilliant students? But she was talking about the emphasis, the primacy not to be produced IIT graduates. IIT graduates were completely lack gender sensitivity, for example. Engineering graduates, IT professionals were side by side also. 24 hours helpline with regard to psychology, clinical psychological therapy, for example. I just met somebody and he is engaged, he cannot probably come. He is catering to the emotional needs of those who are suffering in this city. Therapy, counseling, IT, success story, Infosys, Wipro don't know how to live their lives at the end of the day. Pile of money, but the quality of life nobody has told them because we have lacked holistic education. Liberal education in this country has been completely denied. And with like a horse with you know uh, completely blinkers, for example, we have moved ahead. Fortunately, the new education policy, which is big envisaged, and part of it has been implemented in the state of Karnataka, talks about the integration between the liberal arts and the humanities. Most recently, I wrote an article called New Media and the Liberal Arts, which has just come out in the Frontline magazine. You should read the need for integration between the liberal arts and the sciences and the management. Everybody is going to read it. And the need for credit transfer, the new need for multiple exits, 1 year diploma, second year you can relocate, do something else. It's high time. Those basic, those fundamental changes which should take place. Aurobindo in the foundations of Indian culture talked about the Indian spirit. The Indian spirit is not Satyagraha Pratha. The Indian spirit is not to immolate yourself at the end, at the death of your husband. The Indian spirit is not to dinner and to eat, to get up first thing in the morning and then starve yourself until everybody is fed. And then at the end of the day, you have your meal, is what is left. And everybody says, what a What a wonderful daughter-in-law. That's not Indian spirit. Indian spirit talks about gender equity. Indian spirit talks about the respect for the child. Indian spirit talks about the respect for parents, just as parents also have the need to respect the need for self-determination of the children. Parents are not here to fulfill our unfulfilled desires itself. Look at the manner in which Aurobindo is talked about. And he says freedom. I'm departing from the text and I'm telling you freedom. He says everybody is invoking freedom. And he's talking about law and liberty. And in many respects, law and liberty are not going together. Law. By law, you mean codification, you mean discipline, and you mean the fact that the state has a monopoly to violence. The military, the police, the state has a monopoly of violence. I'm not saying this. Antonio Gramsci was imprisoned by Mussolini, talked about this concept of hegemony, dominance, and monopoly on violence. The police, the paramilitary, the army, they have a monopoly on violence. So, state law has to be backed by violence. Why not law backed by the consent of the people? Why not law backed by the consent of the people? When a magistrate is trained in Masori Academy and goes as a kind of a collector and district magistrate, he is not told that try and ensure the consent of the people by participation. Today in the Niyamgiri district, the collector doesn't have to go. The collector must have the consent of the tribals of Niyamgiri to have the Vedanta Act. And I think it is a good thing. Although there could be political manipulation, but majority of the people must give a say in their own local development itself. Aurobindo is talking about that. The conflict between law and liberty. So that is something that we need to really do. Conflict between law on the one side, discipline, regimentation, army, military, paramilitary, liberty, libertarianism, promiscuity, denial of any kind of order, for example. Aurobindo says that these are all polar opposites, seem to be, but they need to be brought together. And how can they be brought together? By going deep into your own self. And when you can be conscious of the other, you can be conscious of yourself. I want to really refer to, I have been always enamored of the sentence of the mother. He says, what is the definition of the divine? And mother says, when you can be conscious of the whole world at the same time, you can be conscious of the divine. And the world is preparing for a big change. Will you help? It's not that, everything will be done by you mechanically. And the beautiful book, the small book called The Mother, he says, one side, if you invoke the changes, on the other side, you are constantly inviting the anti-divine forces of disharmony, of cruelty, of negativity. How can you hope things to change, for example? Now he says, and the foundation in this book, he says, we go back to the old ancient idea. Because those ancient ideas are the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Puranas, the Bhagavad Gita. That is the contribution of it. He's not talking about cow worship. He's not talking about Sandhya Vandana, for example. He's talking about the essential features of Hinduism, the Sanatana Dharma. And Hinduism's contribution to the world is one of the dreams that he has. It is not against the other, against Islam, against Christianity. No, they are also religions of this country. They have taken roots in this. The Christians in Kerala, they have this kind of vandanas, arti, they have taken roots. Some of their own forefathers might have come from Central Asia, but Islam has taken roots here. Islam has given us great monuments like Taj Mahal, etc. There have been cruel tyrants, but there have been Hindu tyrants also. So I think, and there is a conflict between Buddhism and Hinduism also. So he is talking about acceptance and diversity. And one of the books, one of the chapters I want to draw your attention to is Diversity and Oneness. It's a very important chapter in the ideal humanity. Diversity and oneness. When you discover each person and give freedom to freedom and diversity, then unity will surface itself. And I am in Karnataka. I'm reminded of a wonderful statement by my late friend, U.R. Anantamurthy, who was the president of the Sahitya Academy. He was talking about unity and diversity. And he said, When you really stress on diversity, unity will surface itself. And he said, when you stress on unity, diversity will stress itself. What a beautiful way of negotiating this paradigm, this dichotomy between unity and diversity. Today, we don't talk about unity and diversity. Because if unity and diversity were succeeding, Indian state would not be fighting a war in Kashmir. Indian state would not be fighting a war in northeast of India. Union state will not be fighting a war. Did not have to go to through IPKF to fight a war in Sri Lanka. I do hope that the Indian army doesn't go to Sri Lanka to solve their own nations. We should send supplies and we should send international support. I don't think we should send our own troops to solve other people's nations. We should have the goodwill itself. So unity and diversity. And today we have gone beyond unity and diversity to the importance of every child, for example. And we might say that, look at the children today, they don't have respect for us. But in some ways, they are far more genuine and authentic than us. They don't have the pretensions and claptraps of our own ancestors, of our own generation itself. The point is that how to give them these informed choices. I always tell them, make informed choices, give them the information, let them understand their own situation better. And I think that should be the goal of the new education policy. Give them the choices of the liberal arts, give them the choices of the sciences and engineering, and let them not have an academic caste system with computer science at the top and literature and other disciplines called soft disciplines at the bottom itself. What remains now, friends, is to allow me to share two or three passages from the War and Self-Determination. Is it okay? So far, we're making progress. I hope that I have been simple without being simplistic. I hope I have shared certain ideas with you, not being polemical, and not to suggest that I know all the answers. I'm an inquirer, I'm a fellow seeker like all of you. But you have given me a chance on this Sunday to share some of my ideas, which are exploratory. Unfortunately, this book has done very well in the Frankfurt Book Fair. I took this message to the leftist bastion, JNU, much discredited, and the head of the political science department and the exponent of the Dalit studies, Gopal Guru, rabidly against religion and spirituality, told me, Dr. Mohanty, if you present Sri Aurobindo in this manner, we have no quarrel with Sri Aurobindo. You see, so I think it's important to present him not as a guru of the religious kind, who has all the answers, but he's an inquirer. He never said that I am Bhagavan. You see, until mother came, everybody was sitting together like Mr. Bhattacharya and everybody. And mother said, no, he is a realized soul. And you call him Sri Aurobindo. And to the mother, everybody was saying, Madame Richard, Mother, and, Madame Richard and Madame, all kinds of names were given by Barin Ghosh and others. But Sri Aurobindo said, no, call her the mother. So he gives her the status and she gives him the kind of iconic status. Mutual respect. He never said that I am so and so, you call me like that. So, I mean, Nirod Baral has written, Sri Aurobindo the gentleman, and perfect gentleman, never talking about himself, and so completely oblivious to his needs. Somebody was preparing food and given him food, and there were two chilies, and hot chilies. And Sri Aurobindo was closing his opening his mouth and he was taking the full chilies also he took. No reaction. And Cartier Beso, the photographer who came in 1950 before going to Tiruvannamalai, and Sri Aurobindo and Raman Maharshi passed away almost around the same time in 1950. He said, I have never seen a kind of a person in my life, photography. Last photography I've seen of Sri Aurobindo, he was sitting in a regal manner. And there were flies moving around and he did not even react at all. And we can't stand still, even for a selfie. So it's incredible. Let me just read out 2-3 passages and we will end and then we'll have question answer. Here's a certain flow, I read. Sri Aurobindo, self-determination viewed from this subjective standpoint carries us back at once towards the old spiritual idea of the being within, whose action, once known and self-revealed, is not in obedience to external and mechanical impulses, but proceeds in each from the power of the soul, an action self-determined by the essential quality and principle of which all our becoming is the apparent movement. But it is only as we rise higher, higher in ourselves, and find out our own true self and its true powers that we can get at the full truth of the Soba. So, self, Tatsvamasi, the self, not the ego. The distinction between the self and the desired self, which is the ego, that distinction has to be made by going within and stepping ourselves into those shoes. When you see a beggar on the road and in dire straits, asking for some help, and we turn our back and put on these, the music, Walkman, and completely oblivious in the air-conditioned car, competing who has got the Audi car, who has got Mercedes, and we're oblivious. We're not thinking of that child. We must put ourselves in the shoes. We may not really solve the problems of beggary, but at least we can have an element of, of sympathy so that there is no wastage of food. Another passage I will read out from Sri Aurobindo. He says, you see, what is spiritual change? Sri Aurobindo talks about. But it will not seek to enforce even this uplifting dogma by an external compulsion upon the lower members of man's natural being. For that is nigraha, a repressive contraction of the nature, which may lead to apparent suppression of the evil, but not to a real and healthy growth in the good. So this is like a holistic healing, not the suppression of the disease which allopathy does, but curing, for example. And the mother says that all art of healing is an act of faith, finally. If you go to the nursing home, for example, and Sri Aurobindo's mother's statement is there, finally faith cures. Total healing, holistic healing itself. The body has to participate in the process of healing. We have to listen to the body. The animals, in an instinctive manner, they listen to the body. Have you ever found a cat overeating? If it does, it swallows some blade of grass and it vomits. That is their natural purgation. Have you seen, for example, a lion, after the belly is full, is thinking how many other lambs it's going to kill? It rests tranquil. If you read and the classic narratives of the animal behavior, for example, the animals are guided by their instinct, and instinct saves them. And human beings are guided by rationality, and rationality complicates their own life. So the moment breakfast is over, they are badgering the lady of the house what they're going to have for dinner or lunch, for example. Whether they're going to have a puran puri or lunch or dinner and this. And I think the poor woman's life is completely finished. And that's also not dirty. Every child, I want to have mama, I want to have upma. Yes, I will give you upma. And father says, no, I must have puri and sabji. I'll also give you puri and sabji. And then by that time, 1 o'clock. I'm ready. Khana ready hai? De do. Khana. And then, of course, lunchtime and tea time also, and dinner time, what is being prepared. So we are not guided by either our body, or our instinct, or our own higher self. The mind, perversity. If you don't like, you are conspiring throughout the day how to humiliate that person, how to abuse that person, how to backstab that person. Sri Aurobindo says to go within and to discover the answer. And Gandhiji also talks about that. And Raman Maharshi is also talking about it. It is a question of recuperating of that wisdom itself. And you must remember what Sri Aurobindo said. We don't belong to the noons of the past. We belong to the dawns of the future. And in Foundations of Indian Culture, he says, how to recover that ancient wisdom, and how to use it, define it in our own context, and how to have the roadmap based on that kind of knowledge. So it's all here. The Bhagavad Gita is here. The Purana is here. And of course, Sermon on the Mount is also here. You see? I recently met somebody and I said, I'm an RC. I said, what is RC? She said, Roman Catholic. I said, Jesus Christ is very important. So I said, Jesus Christ is also very important for me. Because in Pondicherry, we celebrated Christmas. He said, are you Christian? I said, no, I am not a Christian. I revere Mahavira. Are you a Jain? You revere Buddha, for example? Buddha's spirit of realization of the vanity of life. Are you a Buddhist? No. We like to put labels. And I would like to suggest that Aurobindo is above labels. He is above isms. There is no approach which can encapsulate and capture Sure. He is universal in his own approach because he believes in diversity and freedom. What is the definition between religion and spirituality? Sri Aurobindo in the foundation of Indian culture says religion is a doctrine, a dogma, and a creed. You might have any number of incenses. You may not have a spiritual approach. You may not have any incense. You may not go to the samadhi and the relic center. Yet you might be also spiritual in your approach. The truth within matters. The externality has no value itself. And of course, that one other passage I'll talk about the child in the spirit, the child in the patriarchal idea, because we are all concerned about the future of the children. And when we see the children and say that कितना बुरा हो गया, हमारा टाइम में कितना अच्छा था, हमारा टाइम में कितने रिस्पेक्टेड थे, पैर छूते थे, अभी पैर नहीं छूते. They're forgetting the fact that when we were touching the feet, what was going on in our mind, nobody asked. Today they said, no, no, no. They will not touch anybody's feet unless they are convinced. I go to people, the children, they're very skeptical. They're questioning. Sometimes at the end of the day, at the end of the session, they touch my feet because they realize that he has some substance. She has some substance. They will recognize the person of worth. They will not follow any ritual for the sake of rituals. Let's listen to what Aurobindo says about the concept of the child and self-determination. The child was in the ancient patriarchal idea, the life property of the father. He was his creation, his production, his own reproduction of himself, the father, rather than God or the universal life in place in God, stood as the author of the child's being, and the creator has every right over his creation. The producer over his manufacturer. He had the right to make of him what he willed. We have traveled to another concept of the child as a soul with a being, a nature and capacities of his own, who must be helped to find them, to find himself, to grow into their maturity, into a fullness of physical and vital energy, and the utmost breadth, depth, and height of his emotional, his intellectual, and his spirituality. Look at this wonderful thing. If a child goes to the school, so-called lucrative and prestigious school, choose any school in Bangalore and doesn't bring some money, you know, the child can be reprimanded in the school. Why haven't your parents really sent us the money for picnic and outing? When I was growing up, I did not have pocket money and I was trying to read Foundations of Indian Culture. I must end on this beautiful and evocative anecdote. And at the entrance, inside the ashram, there was the box called to the mother. So, in a fit of absent-mindedness, I wrote a letter to the mother. Mother, I don't have money to buy Foundations of Indian Culture. Can you please arrange a copy of the book for me? I forgot all about it. In the evening at 5:30, I got a call from Nulinida. It must have been late 60s, early 70s. Just before mother passed away. 73, she passed away. It must have been 69. And I was prepared to be scolded because I thought that I had made some mistakes. And Nulinida told me, have you written a letter to the mother? I said, yes, in trepidation. Mother has sent a copy of the book for you. So you can see that mother was presiding over so many things and was planning for the starting of Auroville. Auroville had just been created. He's thinking of each and every child. To one child would say after adult, you want to get married, you go and get married. To another person says, no, marriage is going to be really disastrous for you, don't get married. To Manoj Das will say, you and your wife have a bigger house. To somebody will say that you have a smaller house. Can we have this system now? मुझे क्यों नहीं मिला? मुझे भी ऐसी मिलना चाहिए. Say, Baba, you are not a writer. You don't need a table and a chair. You are a man of action. You should be given something. So each child, in mother's eyes, each child. So she was doing nothing but implementing Aurobindo ideas in real life itself. And I am suggesting, this is my view, that if you always listen to the other point of view, if you truly believe in diversity, not as a kind of a cultural concept, not as a kind of a shibboleth or an ideal or a doctrine, but to be practiced, that I must really recognize you, Mr. Bhattacharya, at this age. Every 1 month you are calling me Dr. Monty, when are you coming? If I recognize him because he has left his work and he has come to attend this lecture, and all of you have really given up the lure of a Sunday, for example, Sunday serial and other things, for example, you have come. And I think together we stand, individually we sink, for example. I think the future of humanity, the future of the family, and today people are writing the epitaph of the Indian family. I don't think it is too, I think it's too early to write sign of the Indian family or the Western systems. Every system is really good in its own way, for example. And we must really recognize all the institutions that we have built up and never to pass sweeping judgments about things in men and matters. Because, you know, I think experience teaches you to proceed cautiously and never to make sweeping and value judgment. I must really end this little talk of mine by invoking a story from Gandhiji. And once somebody came and said, Bapu, I have a problem because my child is very fond of sugar, sweets, and Gujaratis are very fond of sweets. So Gandhiji said, give me some time. Next day he came. Next day he came. 15 days. And Gandhiji said, wait. And on the 15th day, Gandhiji said, I have the answer. Gave him the answer. I'll tell you what the answer is. I said, but Bapu, you knew the answer, no? Why didn't you give me the answer on the first day? He said, the problem is that I myself is actually very fond of sweets. I'm very fond of sugar. So between the time you told me and the time now, I was practicing upon myself how to remove this, for example, the greed over sugar. If I can't really resolve the greed over sugar, I have no right to tell. Same thing with Jesus Christ, same thing with Raman Maharshi, same thing with Swami Vivekananda, right? When he goes and says, I want to really see the divine. He says, go to the temple of Kali. You will see. And he takes out the sword. Unless you appear before me, I'm going to slay myself. And then he appears also. And says, you ask. He says, you ask whatever you want to. And Goddess Kali asks him. And he says, I want the salvation of humanity. Nara Narayana. And then he comes back. And हमारा language में होने से अरे मैं तो भूल गया मैं दोबारा जाऊंगा. No, over. He's asked the boon for the salvation of humanity. That was manifest by Ramakrishna Mission. The salvation of humanity. Nara Narayana. And our Guru Sri Aurobindo, when he goes to Uttarpada and he stands there and he says, my mind is completely blank. Completely blank. The greatest figure that a thinker and a man of intellect can have when the mind goes blank. I mean, I have prepared my notes, but Sri Aurobindo comes and he talks about the greatness of Sanatana Dharma. The words come, flow when the mind is completely silent. And then, of course, you become a perfect kind of a channel. That is how Sri Aurobindo is writing the life divine and others. So, friends, thank you so much for listening to me and giving me a chance to offer some of these words which are really exploratory in character. If you have any questions and answers, I'll be very happy to answer any of the questions I answer. In fact, I'll be disappointed If there are no clarification questions and answers in any language, I understand Hindi, Gujarati, Bengali, and English and Odia, of course, any language. Yes.
How does one maintain a sense of community while having that?
Good question. How do you maintain, Yaminiji, how do you maintain a sense of community when you believe in diversity? The answer that Aurobindo has given and the answer that I have experienced, there are two answers. One is to Yaminiji to be an example. Very important to be an example. You know, to be an example in whatever you are doing. If you have a cleanliness drive, be an example. Not in a ritualistic manner, but every day. Secondly, to recognize each person's strength and weaknesses. If you believe that community spirit, somebody, you must learn also to forgive. You must learn to excuse. You must not be so judgmental and harsh. If you decide that tomorrow we are going to have Shramdan in Bhavan and two persons don't want to come, for example, another person is doing something to earn money in the city, for example, Chane do. You just have 10 people. From the 10, you will have 12. Because I can tell you that those people who are playing truant, who are staying here and making use of the facilities and not contributing, they are also monitoring. They are clever enough to monitor what is happening, for example, and preparing themselves to answer. Don't give them a chance. It doesn't matter. They are not here to really make a failure or a success of this business. The presiding duty is here. The cause is there. These Routledge people, I mean, they had not really come and they're not responded. I said it's for a good cause. I'm not interested in money making through my books, but people will have a chance. Rajesh has come. I never said that, bring the flyer, bring the books. I said for a cause. There is something called my salary, my pension. There is something which is for the cause. And each one of us should believe in a little cause. So if you believe in this cause, Yamaguchi, if you have given a clarion call, if some people come, they don't come, it doesn't matter. I want to give you an example from the mother. I've given you an example from Gandhiji. When Nandini Satpathy, who was then the Information and Broadcasting Minister, and Indira Gandhi, they visited. Nandini Satpathy asked the mother, because in 1970, that Rajesh Khanna had gone and that Amitabh Bachchan came, an angry young man. Because by 1970, Indian society had become totally corrupt. So he produced that. The one film was produced called Andha Kanun. So Andha Kanun is very different from Aradhana. The singing and dancing, capturing the time of the nation, state of the nation. But by 1917, that song and romance of Asha Parekh, etc., was gone. I'm giving you examples from Bollywood. Because Bollywood is a reflection of our own society. So all those songs like Javani, Divani and Asha Parekh, etc., gone. Now, angry young man. And Insaf Ka Taraj. The rapist is going to, the rape woman is going to take revenge, for example. So Nandini Satpathy comes and asks mother how to root out corruption. And when it's third time also, to be an example, that you are not going to be corruptible. Now the government is saying whoever is giving a bribe and whoever is taking a bribe have to be removed. First of all, why should you take a bribe? You're getting a salary. You're not attending to your duty and you are taking a bribe. And we are willing to give a bribe also. What would have happened? It would have taken 10 days. Now in 1 day's time. So the point is that we have to decide, we have to have a clarity as to what we want. Do you want Moment, for example, when I'm going wrong, how to correct myself, how to not to be impulsive, how not to be angry, how to appreciate, for example. When you travel in the plane and we're treating the flight left attendants as kind of a dirt, हमने पैसा दिया, हमको सर्विस दे रहा है. But I learned in the ashram, could you do this for me? Could you give me a glass of water? My folks back home says, सच्ची इतना थैंक यू क्यों बोल रहे हैं सबको इन ओडिया एते कौन दरकार थैंक यू फॉर्मेलिटी कौन दरकार behavior. Look at the manner in which, for example, they were doing yoga at home. I saw my parents doing yoga at home. Before we woke up, they had already taken a walk outside. We used to be ashamed. Today, I think I really like Madanji one term. It's called public shaming. I think there has to be a public shaming, moral shaming. You know, if you don't do something, you should not really be respected. We should say yes, yes, but we should not really deeper down respect those people. Social deviance should not be respected. California, there is a billboard that says Bahamas. What the hell are you doing? Bahamas is 500 miles away. As if you will get deliverance by going to Bahamas. When you go to Bahamas, you will have a fight with your partner. When you come back, there are greater fights also. Because the problem is all inside. It is not by visiting a place, it can help you, but temporarily. You have to find the answer yourself. You have to find harmony in yourself. So that's my short and long answer, Yamini. Yes, Madanji, Madanji. Yes, yes, please. You are a Because the decolonialism, unlike South America and Africa, is not taken up. No. See, why I'm saying that post-colonial thought, they still depend on the definition of certain things set by the colonial thought. Correct. Whether it is about secularism, whether it is tolerance, whatever it is. So that liberation, that slow explosion started taking place now. Decolonial art. So Aurobindo, interpretation of Aurobindo from a decolonial angle. So that I think it has to be emphasized more and more. Then that will lead. Map, guide map. And there is a map of the layout of the institution. I think probably we just drive through, we don't see. There's always a map. And there is an arrow which says you are here. Very important. Your location is very important. Philosophy asks, why are you here? Nobody asks, why are you here? Philosophy is important. You come to Bhavan. You are here, Mr. Bhattacharya, but why are you here? That question also should be asked in that book map. So you can says that we can hope to control India by not by superior armaments alone, by superior morality, superior standards of on ethics, for example. We are superior to them. So that superiority, of course, has been ingrained in our own blood itself. So that if there is a flight lieutenant and a flight lieutenant, maybe a flight attendant, and see an Indian and a foreigner, goes to the foreigner itself. It's there in our own blood. We have inherited this inferiority complex. capitalist. And Gandhiji was talking about the trusteeship. It's not the possession of wealth that is important, bad or good, the manner in which wealth is being used. So my answer is that post-colonialism, if it is still tied to the apron strings of the Western metropolitan intellectual class, that is again a form of slavery. Because fellowship is there, grants are there, endowments are there, and you sell your grandmother to go to Harvard University. The important thing is that you deal with them on equal terms. He comes from an apex family. His father was a great revolutionary, left-wing revolutionary. But today he's serving the Indian state, for example. And then he goes to Tiruvannamalai. I'm just giving examples, but I'm sure these examples can be replicated in the case of all of you who have come here. Each one of you might really come. Rajeshji has left important things and he has come. Yesterday I sent a mail. I said, I'm going to Bhagan. I want the flyers and the books to come. It is for a good cause. I sent a mail. There somebody had not responded. And sure, right last night, the call. Ministry of Education and HRD. Sorry, sir, it cannot be done according to the rights and statutes. They said, fine. They wanted me to appoint somebody as a pro-vice chancellor because they had some kind of understanding with some party, friendly party. So he called, said, Dr. Mohanty, I think you should really take this man. You're testing, flying kites. Dr. Mohanty, and those calls come suddenly when you are just about to take bath and there is some student unrest, the call will come. And Dr. Mohanty, I think you should take this man. Get a call and I said, I'll get back to you. And then I don't get back. No, that is absolutely hypocritical and pretentious. So I called him back and I said, I'll have to deny 15 people if I were to give. No, I think you must realize that this university was created by us. You are a latecomer. This university is meant to really take care of the needs of the students. I said, yes, but not in an unfair way. There are two areas I'm not going to compromise. One, the selection of the faculty. Two, the admission of the students. Everything else. You want yesterday you told me this, but today you are telling me this. So I'm giving examples because that's what we understand. Friends, families, children, parents. That's what life is all about. So I used to recite a poem, Aurobindo poem. I said he wrote the poem. I have two beings in my single self. And then when there is a little bit of a discrepancy, she says, I have two beings in my single self. I said, right, but I agree with you. Next time I will not do it. Sister Nivedita killed herself, died because of the overwork of the destitute women, young girls being widowed. I've written about it. I'll pass it on, Yamini. It's called Three Women and Four Destinies. Three Women and Four Destinies. What are the three women? The life in Ramakrishna, Sardamani, number one. Then Sister Nivedita. And third, Sister Sudhira was close to Nivedita. And the fourth is, of course, Nilamini, Aurobindo wife. For the first time in the life that he has seen, his eyes became moist and glistened. There were tears, Shorbind, because he knew how much she suffered. When she begged to be with him, he said, I have I have madness. You married a mad person because I am really dedicated to the freedom of the country. So how much he really thought for the country. And civil service man, Baroda state, and somebody tells are you going to keep quiet? He said no. And yoga he did not to become a sannyasi, but to become a better instrument, so that I have control over my faculties. And you should read Kara Kahini, The Tales of Prison Life by Aurobindo. And he says the way, and then he goes to the and C.R. Das was defending him, Chittaranjan Das. And he goes there and he says, why am I put behind? Why am I put behind bars? I am meant to. So he was also afraid. He said, what's going to happen to me? In Bollywood style, he would say, Mera kya hoga re Kalia? Mera kya hoga? Nothing is going to happen. You are going to, your lifetime will become, your sentence to death will be commuted. So Kalia was also Bajia. Kalia, Sri Aurobindo's younger brother. They appealed and it was commuted to life imprisonment. That too, when George V was coronated, Was this. And you know what Macaulay said? Macaulay did not believe in diversity. Macaulay said one shelf of book of the West, England, exceeds the entire wisdom of the East. He said that in his great arrogance. That's not diversity. That is arrogance. That is imperialism. And Gauri Vishwanathan has written a very fine book, English Education and the English Road. English Education and the British Road. How the English education was used but there were some people who were against him. They wanted to spirit him to Kadalur. So they raided. The police raided his house. And what did they find? Somebody told him that he knows Greek. So the policeman says, French policeman says, Greek must be a very civilized man. He cannot be a terrorist. Then his house was raided in Bengal. You know, they wanted to, they had confiscated Vande Mataram and they wanted to imprison him because of his writing, fiery writing. Insulted. I don't know what would have happened if he had said, Bhavan, you sleep on the floor. But we were deciding, I think tonight we are going to sleep on the floor because it's cooler. It's cooler to sleep on the floor. I slept on the floor, to tell you very, confessional mode. Halfway through, I said, I must have my energy, I must speak, I must sleep on the floor. I slept on the floor under duress. Shuravinda slept on the floor. And the policeman said, shame on you. The Cambridge man. To Princeton. Look at this nobody that you have and the great modesty that you're with. He and Gandhiji and all that. He was called the naked fakir. He was also well trained and returning Pretoria to Johannesburg. His bag and baggages, everything was thrown outside. And that was the beginning of his baptism of freedom, nationalism. Because your skin, your dress, you are condemned because of your skin. And he Bindu used to write a letter to Kali. Please arrange some money for me. Kali. Sure, Bindu. Kali is the goddess. Kali the mother. Dear Kali, please arrange some money. There are 10 of us here. We don't have enough money. Huh? Leave it. And they didn't have one comb. Five of them were using one comb, one towel. So mother comes and stops. Dear Kali. And then, of course, from Chandan Nagar, somebody will send some money. If you read Paramahansa Yogananda, autobiography of Yogi, you should read the lives of great people. Read Sister Nivedita, Cradles of Hinduism, Master as I saw him, as I have been reading. Every day I read and I get inspired. And nobody compared to them, the selfless life that they led. Biographies of great persons. Words of mother and children, not just mother and children. Raman Maharshi also. Somebody was scolding Raman Maharshi and said that he was abusing you. Was it necessary? Can I make amends tomorrow? Can I give a better smile to this person? Mr. Bhattacharya has been calling me for almost every month. So I told my wife, let us go and meet him first. In our own way, we must show respect. Yamini ji is here. We talk to each other how to reach this message to the engagement columns. She has given time. Sukanta from Odisha has received. Anirban met me yesterday. Each one of you is important. And Snigdha not be watching. Because all this bloodshed about Ukraine, this, that, I don't want to see. I know it is really wrong, and Putin is wrong, and this man should stop. UN should be more active. And I send a silent prayer for the victims of poetry. That's what I do. Each one of us. And mother said these are all forces. And that is why in the playground she used to have collective meditation. Shorabinda's yoga is a collective yoga, my friends. It is not a yoga of individual salvation, of sannyasa, retreat to some mountain top. It is a collective salvation. And Buddha said, take sacrifices. And she says, and Sister Sudhira says that each time she was teaching Om to the children, says, Om, greatness of India, greatness of India. O Bharata, O Bharata Varsha. Annie Besant comes and discovers the greatness of India. Mother Teresa comes and discovers the greatness of India. And of course, the Mira Alpasa, the mother comes and great. So mother power, so important. I think, you know, and how we can relate to each other. And if we can do that, we don't have to necessarily, you might go to Ravi Shankar, you might go to any other guru also, but it's all within us. I am not against anything. Go to Ravi Shankar ji if you want to. Go to Sadhguru ji if you want to. Because each one of us has to have a guru. And Synthesis of Yoga, Sri Aurobindo says, that guru is inside ourselves. The guru is manifest in the writings. It's been so wonderful to listen to all of you and to hear all of you. Thank you. Thank you. These flyers are there, and those of you, and Rajesh, just identify yourself. These two books are, apart from all my books, these two books are directly related to Sri Aurobindo and meant for an outreach in the academic and the media circles. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for such a wonderful session. I thoroughly enjoyed the talk. And we hope to have